is Charlie Olson.
Hello, my name is John Duffy.
Welcome to the Environment TV. This is our weekly news show.
In the short time that we have with you right now,
There are more environmental topics than we can cover,
but we would like to touch on topics that are most interest to you.
and it's possible to do that, but only if we have your help.
So, if there's a particular story of interest to you,
Contact us,
or research and write about it,
or Skype, or send us an audio news report from wherever you are,
we hope to shed some light on many environmental issues.
and hope that you can join us.
So,
So please sit back now and watch this week's weekly news show.
Thank you.
This week on Environment TV Weekly News, we're going to talk about faith communities. And with us is Steve Knight.
Morning, Ken.
Morning.
I appreciate being given the opportunity to speak to everyone. I'm Steve Knight. I'll say a little bit about myself. I'm an Episcopalian. I belong to an Episcopal church on the east side of Manhattan. I have for about 20 years. I've been active there, served on their vestry, their board. I'm also a co-founder of their Peace and Justice Ministry. Approximately 2 years ago, I began to get much more interested in religious environmental issues. I became a fellow in a group called Green Faith. Now, Green Faith is an interfaith religious environmental advocacy organization. They've been around for over 20 years. They do a number of things with houses of worship of all faiths to make them more energy efficient, help them to green their education and their buildings and grounds and all of that thing. But one thing that Green Faith has done over the past year and a half has to start a divestment and reinvestment campaign called Divest and Reinvest Now. It's a campaign that's encouraging, and it's an international campaign. It's a campaign that's encouraging religious congregations and religious institutions to divest from fossil fuels and reinvest in energy efficiency and renewable energy. So I've taken a leadership role with that. It's been a real educational experience for me. I've talked to people around the country who are involved within their own faith communities in doing divestment and reinvestment. I've also had the opportunity recently to start a meetup group that meets monthly in Manhattan. It's called Religious Communities for Divestment and Reinvestment. And our group brings together people, like Green Faith does, it brings together people from all faith traditions who want to learn more about doing divestment from a religious perspective, to begin a divestment campaign within their congregation or their religious institution. Now, I should probably say a little bit by way of background about why I got interested in fossil fuel divestment. I think it's important to keep in mind that most of the work that we religious divestment people do is no different than what someone involved with fossil fuel divestment from a non-religious perspective would do. We understand the same science. We understand that, as we have learned from the Carbon Tracker report, that at least 65%, maybe 80% of known fossil fuel reserves must stay in the ground if we're going to avoid having an average worldwide temperature increase of about 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. Those reserves must stay in the ground, we're told. So the question is, how do we get to that? People have pursued various strategies on this. Some have tried going to government. Some have tried going through the United Nations. Some have tried going to corporate leaders. They've tried as shareholders to go to annual meetings of corporations and bring resolutions asking for these corporations to change their behavior. Unfortunately, while they're all well-meaning, none of these strategies have really worked. So what we in the divestment community believe is that now is the time, if we're going to have real meaningful change in our carbon emissions so that we have a sustainable future, for us to pursue divestment as a strategy. Now again, as I said before, we in the religious community, for the most part, work our divestment campaigns the same as any non-religious group would. But there is one crucial difference, is that in faith communities, we're dealing with the moral and ethical core of our faith traditions. Now, for example, I'm an Episcopalian. I'm part of the Christian faith. Part of our scriptural tradition is stewardship for the earth. The importance of preserving a sustainable earth for future generations. That comes out strongly in our book of Genesis. Even if you're not Christian, you probably know about Noah and the ark. And after Noah has preserved life in the ark, God comes forth and makes a covenant with Noah and says, we have a covenant to preserve this earth. That's how it comes out in my tradition, but again, I'll emphasize, all major religious traditions in the world have the preservation of life and the preservation of our planet for future generations as a core part of our moral and ethical background. And as religious divestment people, what we try to do is to tap into the core of that tradition within whatever faith community the person comes from, so that they can articulate that to people within their congregation. And it's really been inspiring to me to see just, in the relatively short time that we've had a well-organized religious divestment movement, the kinds of progress that we've made. Last year, approximately 1 year ago, in July of 2013, the United Church of Christ became the first major religious body to pass a divestment resolution at their annual convention. They've been followed since by, much more recently, in late June of this year, by the Unitarian Universalists, who also passed a divestment resolution. And there are various other religious groups that are pursuing divestment quite actively. The Presbyterian Church here in the U.S., for example, several presbyteries have passed divestment resolutions. They brought a divestment resolution to their annual convention this spring. It did not pass outright, but they did pass a substitute resolution that asked the Presbyterians to examine this issue further for their next convention next year. We've seen this going on internationally too. There are churches in Canada, in Australia, as well as the Church of England, have, if not outright passed divestment resolutions, are at least considering divestment. I am quite proud to say that as an Episcopalian, I'm part of the Anglican Communion, the Worldwide Anglican Communion. We are divided into many provinces within that communion. A few weeks ago, the first Anglican province, that's the province of New Zealand and Polynesia, passed a divestment resolution. So I was very happy to hear about that. I have been very pleased lately at the decision by Union Theological Seminary, that's a religious seminary in Upper Manhattan, by their decision several weeks ago that they would divest their endowment, which is a little bit over $100 million, not a small amount of money, but I think it's a very important move. Again, it's considered a major religious seminary within the United States, and hopefully that's going to be a model for other religious institutions of its size and its influence to make their own decision for divestment. And I think going forward, it's really important for us to keep in mind that there are many people of faith out there who are hungering for a more responsible investment of their institutional resources in investments that will preserve the future of the planet. And we think that fossil fuel divestment and clean energy reinvestment are an important part of that. Now again, I'll talk a little bit just for a moment from my Christian perspective, if you don't mind.
That's why you're here.
In Christianity, we have both the crucifixion and the resurrection. And the resurrection part of that is the hope. Key to our faith tradition is that we have hope for the future. That's where the reinvestment comes in. Once a religious community has divested, where do they put their assets? There are plenty of places right now, some of them just being formed as we talk, that are giving investors more and more choices about doing fossil-free divestment. I could speak a little bit about some of the individual firms that are doing that. I'm not sure, frankly, if you want me to do that here for this forum or not, but I mean, I could mention that, for example, there's a fossil-free index fund that was just put out by FTSE, FTSE, and BlackRock. That's been offered on the market. There is a company called Green Century Capital that offers fossil-free investment vehicles, as well as there are many other investment products. There are fossil-free plays, for example, in real estate or in other kinds of assets where investors are being directed towards investing in a way that will preserve the planet for future generations. So again, I'm really happy to be here and to be talking about this movement. I think that it's wonderful that we have a divestment movement that's been picked up by colleges, universities, by nonprofit institutions, civic institutions. All of these types of institutions are pursuing it, but as a person of faith, I'm really happy to see that there's an increasing number of religious communities that are becoming involved in divestment and reinvestment. So that's kind of where I'm coming from this morning.
So why should people care about divestment? Does it really have an effect? Fossil fuel companies are going to still burn stuff, and what they burn is going to contribute to climate chaos. The methane in the pipelines is leaking, and whether you divest or not, and that's contributing to climate chaos. So how does this affect those operations?
I think you bring up a very good question there, Ken. We should keep in mind that any single institution divesting is not going to make a huge difference. After all, what any given church or any given, say, endowment of a religious institution holds is a very tiny fraction of the total wealth that's in the stock for a fossil fuel company. So that alone is not going to do it. What we really hope to do in the religious divestment movement is to change the conversation, to make it morally unacceptable for people of faith, either as individuals or as members of institutions, to hold shares in companies that are going to make the planet unsustainable for future generations. Now again, as I mentioned earlier, some have pursued an opposite strategy from divestment. They've pursued what's usually called shareholder activism. There's a group here in New York City, for example, called the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility that has done a wonderful job with that over the years. They work with many religious institutions and they encourage them, don't divest, hold your shares. As long as you hold your shares, you can go to annual meetings and you can speak and you can present resolutions that will hopefully change the behavior. Well, I really respect greatly what they've done. I respect shareholder activism in general. In some ways, it's opened up a conversation in fossil fuel companies about the possibility of changing their behavior, but ultimately, it really hasn't worked. There has not been, at least that I'm aware of, a single shareholder resolution that's ever passed at an annual meeting of a fossil fuel company that has significantly changed the behavior, the ordinary business operations of that corporation. So, unfortunately, that's a strategy that I don't think is going to succeed.
Well, don't the officers of the corporation control most of the stock in that corporation?
Well, I think for most of the big fossil fuel corporations, for example, ExxonMobil or Chevron or BP, I would guess that more of the shares are held by large institutional investors. And the large institutional investors do play a significant role. They are listened to because they simply hold so many shares of stock. That's one reason why, to speak about my non-religious side as a divestor, I'm a member of 350 NYC's divestment group. And right now here in New York, we're pursuing campaigns encouraging New York City and New York State's pension funds to divest. Both of those pension funds hold large amounts of shares in fossil fuel companies. That could potentially be huge. But again, in the religious community, we speak from a moral and ethical core about this, that holding these shares is morally and ethically unacceptable.
And earlier this month, the World Council of Churches made an announcement.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about
Sure.
that whole thing.
Well, the World Council of Churches, understand, is an umbrella Christian organization. It's composed of approximately 350 churches, church denominations worldwide. Somewhere between 500 and 600 million Christians worldwide belong to a church that's part of the World Council of Churches, including the Episcopal Church, of which I'm a member. The World Council of Churches announced several weeks ago that they were planning to divest from fossil fuels, which certainly made me and a lot of people in the religious divestment community very happy. Keep in mind now that the World Council of Churches was not, nor did they have the authority to tell their individual member denominations anything about divestment. They were only divesting their endowment that they hold within their central office. And that's a relatively small amount of money. The really cheering thing, I think, about the World Council of Churches decision is that hopefully it will set a standard that many of the member organizations will follow in choosing themselves for divestment.
Has it?
Well, it's too early to say right now. We're only talking about 3 weeks after they announced. So, Ken, I think you are going to see that happen, and with some increasing speed amongst religious denominations, but it's a little too early to say for that particular thing.
I'm just wondering what kind of discussions you may have heard since that announcement that I would not have heard.
I've mainly been talking to people who are also divestment activists within religious communities, and they, like me, do believe that some good things are going to come from this. Because, again, when we talk about the World Council of Churches, we're talking just about Christian houses of worship. But you're really talking about most of the Christian houses of worship in the world fall under their umbrella. So again, it's between 500 and 600 million people are members of those churches. If a significant number of those churches decide that they will divest, that's going to be huge. And personally, I think that's going to happen.
Wow.
With what speed, I don't know. I think it's going to happen.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to us on Environment TV.
You are most welcome, Ken. It's been a pleasure. Have a good day.
Let me tell you about the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees and the water and the sky. Don't let it all go bye-bye. This is the Bee Report with Mercy Van Vleck from Environment TV Weekly News in New York City. We're here at Carl Shores Park again, talking about the bees. I used to be a beekeeper in Pennsylvania. And one time we ordered bees from Sears. You could order goats, you can order guinea fowl. We ordered bees with the queen, and it comes in a container with all this wire mesh. And the people in the post office are very concerned because they get it. And they have to bring it to your house, and this thing is going, It's kind of scary. But the queen is in there, and they all stay with their queen so they don't leave. And it's amazing, you can get bees in the mail. I have some news from Friends of the Earth. The new tests are finding that bee-killing pesticides in 51% of the bee-friendly plants from garden centers across the United States and Canada. 51% of these bee-friendly plants. This was posted in June 25th by Kate Colwell of Friends of the Earth. Washington, D.C. Many bee-friendly home garden plants sold at Home Depot, Lowe's, and Walmart have been pre-treated with pesticides shown to harm and kill bees, according to a study released today by Friends of the Earth and allies. The study, Gardeners Beware 2014, shows that 36 out of 71, 51%, of garden plant samples purchased at top garden retailers in 18 cities in the United States and Canada contain neonicotinoids. neonic pesticides, a key contributor to recent bee declines. Some of the flowers containing neonic levels high enough to kill bees outright, assuming comparable concentrations are present in the flower's pollen and nectar. Further, 40% of the positive samples contain 2 or more neonics. The high percentage of contaminated plants and their neonicotinoid concentrations suggests that this problem continues to be widespread, said Lisa Archer, director of the Food and Technology Program at Friends of the Earth, United States. Most gardeners have no idea that their gardens may be a source of harm to bees. We're calling on retailers to get neonicotinoid pesticides out of their plants, off their shelves, as soon as possible. Until then, gardeners should buy organic plants to ensure the safety of your bees. Our data indicate that many plants sold in nurseries and garden stores across the US and Canada are being pre-treated with neonicotinoids. Enough to make them potentially toxic to pollinators, said Timothy Brown, PhD, co-author of the report from the Pesticide Research Institute. Unfortunately, these pesticides don't break down quickly, so these plants could be toxic to bees for years to come. Bees and other pollinators, essential for 2/3 of the food crops humans eat every day, are in decline in countries around the world. The European Union banned the 3 most widely used neonicotinoids based on strong science indicating that neonics can kill bees outright and make them more vulnerable to pests, pathogens, and other stressors. The report, Gardeners Beware, 2014, bee toxic pesticides found in bee-friendly plants, sold at garden centers, tips for consumers, and a complete list of organizations and cities where plant samples were gathered can be found at www.beeaction.org. This news is from Friends of the Earth. It's the U.S. voice of the world's largest federation of grassroots environmental groups with a presence in 64 countries. They work to defend the environment and champion a more healthy and just world. Check it out, www.foe.org. And August 16th, save that date, on Saturday, there's a Swarm New York City to Save the Bees on Facebook. Check out Facebook, BEE, against Monsanto/events, facebook.com. There are going to be rallies in Germany, Australia, and Erie, Pennsylvania. There's a great picture of them having a die-in with people in bee costumes, even little baby bees. It's terrible. So be active, protect the hive, protect your food supply and the earth. Thank you. This is Mercy from Environment TV Weekly News in New York City at this beautiful park in New York City.
This is Ken Gale for Environment TV Weekly News here in Carl Schurz Park on the east side of Manhattan. Mainstream TV and radio give you very little environmental news. The New York Times got rid of its environmental news desk. Commercial radio stations say outright that people don't care about the environment. So independent sources are more important than ever. So please tell your friends about Environment TV. And I am posting information on Ecologic's Facebook page rather frequently. That's WBAI Ecologic. No spaces, no dashes. Ecologic is a radio show that I do, produce, and host on environmental issues that is broadcast on WBAI FM, a listener-supported radio station. So Facebook, WBAI Ecologic. And Environment TV's Facebook page is The Environment TV. And this wonderful information comes from Australia. Giles Parkinson on July 7th wrote for the online Australian magazine reneweconomy.com.au under the headline, "Even if coal were free, it couldn't compete with solar." The wholesale price of electricity in Queensland, Australia fell into negative territory in the middle of the day. For several days, the price, normally around $40 to $50 per megawatt hour, hovered in and around zero. Prices were deflated throughout the week. Now, there were several reasons for this. A restricted interconnector to New South Wales added to the volatile trading, as did uncertainty about the carbon price. But the overall softening of prices was primarily the result of the newest and one of the biggest power stations in that state of Australia, rooftop solar. Negative pricing moves, as they are known, are not uncommon, but they are only supposed to happen at night when most of the population is asleep, demand is down, and operators of coal-fired generators are reluctant to switch off. So they are willing to pay others to pick up their output. Negative pricing is not supposed to happen in the middle of the day. Daytime prices are supposed to reflect higher demand when people are awake. Office buildings are in use and factories are in production. It is supposed to be the time of day when fossil fuel generators used to make most of their money. The impact has been so profound and wholesale prices pushed down so low that few coal generators in Australia made a profit last year. Hardly any are making a profit this year. State-owned generators, such as Stanwell, are specifically blaming rooftop solar. Yeah, they use the word blaming, like free electricity was a bad thing. Rooftop solar electricity is changing that model in Europe too. The article went on to compare hypothetical free coal in power plants to rooftop solar, and it still couldn't compete due to the transmission costs and retailer charges. Network operators in Queensland, Australia are prohibiting customers from putting excess solar energy into the grid, probably to protect the coal industry and keep individuals from making a profit on their solar panels. But that's just causing people to install batteries for their excess power. And in the US, Public Power Weekly had an interesting article in their February 6, 2012 issue about wind power being so plentiful in Iowa at one point that the nuclear plant in Palo, Iowa had to pay to put its electricity on the grid. Clearly, renewable energy can be cheap and plentiful. And thanks to the group Haslam and Terrace in Wilmington, Delaware, for bringing the Australian article to my attention. A July 23rd CBS News report said that there are more climate deniers in the U.S. than any other country. They based their report on a survey from Ipsos Mori, one of the largest market research companies in Great Britain, from their new Global Trends 2014 survey covering data from 200 questions with over 16,000 interviewees in 20 countries, 8 European countries, 5 Asian, 1 African, 2 North American, 2 South American, plus Russia and Australia. I looked over the results myself and have a few things to say about it. There were 8 questions, all asking if the person agrees, disagrees, or doesn't know. 1. We are heading for environmental disaster unless we change our habits quickly. 73% of all people surveyed agreed. The US was last, with 57%, which I point out is still a majority. 2. The government is just using environmental issues as an excuse to raise taxes. 58% of all people surveyed agreed, 50% from the US, which is near the bottom. 3. I'm tired of the fuss that is being made about the environment. 60% disagreed. 60% disagreed, 54% from the US disagreed. 4. Even the scientists don't really know what they're talking about on environmental issues. 48% agreed, 43% in the US. 5. Companies do not pay enough attention to the environment. 77% agreed, 65% in the US, which is second to the last after Japan. 6. The climate change we are currently seeing is a natural phenomenon that happens from time to time. 49% disagreed, 52% in the US agreed. 7. I try to recycle as much as I can. 80% agreed, 76% in the US, which made me laugh cynically. And 8, the climate change we are currently seeing is largely the result of human activity. 76% worldwide agreed, only 54% in the US, which is the lowest number, with 32% disagreeing, which is the highest number. I found it bizarre that the only solution mentioned was recycling, not energy use, not energy efficiency, not renewable energy, or anything to do with cars and planes or local food. But why is this survey important? The United States is responsible for more greenhouse gases per person than any other country. China produces more in total, but we produce more per person, and without political will, this is less likely to change. Compared to other countries, we're rather uneducated about climate change. But if an election were to be 54% to 32%, it would be considered a landslide. So there is indeed political will. Now I'm curious to see if the huge climate march in New York on September 21st and the events before and after it will affect what goes on in the voting booth in November and what those politicians do when they're in office in 2015.
Hi Pete, how are you?
Good, how you doing, John?
Good. Welcome to Environment TV.
Great to be here.
Could you explain a little bit about what's going on the 21st of September and the weekend?
Sure. Just to give some context for the 21st, well, on the 21st of September, there's going to be the largest climate march in the history of this country. It's called the People's Climate March. We got people coming from across the nation, from all over the world. And the reason they're coming to New York City is because on Tuesday, September 23rd, Ban Ki-moon has called for a UN climate summit. Ban Ki-moon being the Secretary General of the UN. And what makes this unique, as opposed to some of the other UN climate conferences that have taken place before, is that world leaders typically send delegates, low-level diplomats to those climate talks that have happened in the past. This time, world leaders themselves are going to be here in New York. And the event is coming at a crucial moment because, as hopefully people are aware, we've reached 400 parts per million of carbon equivalent gas in the atmosphere, approaching thresholds that scientists tell us will lead to even more extreme weather caused by climate change, and creating feedback loops that will spiral out of control. We're actually at a moment where if we don't start to reverse the trend of warming on this planet, then we're looking at some very tough, dire, resource-scarce times ahead. So for 20 years, the UN, governments around the world have been talking about addressing climate change. But over that same period, global emissions of greenhouse gases have actually doubled. So obviously something is not working. And who's really feeling the effects of increased emissions of greenhouse gases? It's the poor and it's the working class around the world, in this country and globally, who are feeling the most severe impacts of storms, tidal waves, floods, rising sea levels. So now that we got the world leaders coming to town, we want them to recognize the voice of the people, and that's what's going to be happening on September 21st. So I hope Environment TV watchers will come out, hit the streets. Those details are still being worked out, but we're looking at a very large presence of indigenous peoples, union activists, national environmental organizations, all organizing under this big umbrella, calling for world leaders to agree to drastic greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Because if they don't, we're all in trouble.
People that may have trouble getting here. I mean, it's a big city, it's a little difficult sometimes to get here. What are you guys doing to reach out to people and help them get here?
Well, I would go to peoplesclimate.org, and there's going to be about 500 buses coming from, throughout the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic region. There'll be lots of options to hop on those. And you can go to peoplesclimate.org to get updates about what's taking place. Hopefully, potentially folks can come in earlier, because the group that I organize with, System Change Not Climate Change, we're putting together a climate convergence, because we recognize that movements are more than just marching and holding signs. They depend on a lot of dialogue. They depend on long-term planning, on organizational structures that emerge out of protest that can sustain movements. So on the 19th and the 20th, there's going to be what we're calling a climate convergence here in New York City, and we also have people coming from around the world, and our great nation, America, to help lay some groundwork, build relationships, and see if we can develop some further action plans that will carry the climate movement, out of this weekend and beyond. Because, as I've said, we're really getting down the line where if we don't make investing in green technology a priority, and we don't stop emitting fossil fuels, we're in deep trouble. And, we live in a country right now where less than 1% of our energy comes from renewable sources. And we also know, if you look at research, particularly coming from Stanford and Mark Z. Jacobson, that the entire country could be powered something like 30 times over by wind power alone and 7 times over by solar power. So we have the technological capability, we just don't have the investment because we have a political system that is ruled by fossil fuel corporations. That's why the group I organize with is called System Change, Not Climate Change, because we can fight for immediate reforms, we can fight for things like a Green New Deal, we can fight for things like a carbon tax, but we also need to have a system that doesn't outsource the cost of waste, we need to have a system that doesn't outsource the cost of waste and pass the extreme results of that waste, things like carbon emissions, onto us, everyday working people who have to deal with what happens when storms like Superstorm Sandy come into our neighborhoods and flood our homes and leave people without power. We have to deal with that. ExxonMobil gets the profits. So we need to actually have a system that's not ruled by profit, that's actually democratic, and where people have a say in how they get their energy and have a chance to actually work to build, the better future that we desperately need.
Could you speak on one of the events that you may know of, if you can, that's going on that might interest people even more?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have several, important names coming. I don't want to, brag about them, but let me just say, we're working with a great coalition of activists. And the spaces we're going to use, I think, they're really going to be conducive to having dialogue and to building structures that can sustain themselves going out of this weekend. We're talking community gardens throughout the Lower East Side. Anyone who lives in New York knows that public space, the right to green space, is a big struggle. And, for decades, activists have fought and carved out green spaces in one of the most concrete-ridden zones of the city. And we're partnering with them. We're partnering with a repurposed steamship, which is really exciting. It's been turned into a library, and we're going to have workshops there. So it's really going to be an exciting time. About 30 people are right now marching across the country, and they're picketing tar sands refineries, and they're picketing military installations, drawing attention to the amount of fossil fuels that our military burns. They're going all across the country, and they're going to arrive in New York City when the convergence begins. So it's really going to be an exciting time. And of course, people can plug into System Change, Not Climate Change. Our demand is the name of our organization, and it's also our website, systemchangenotclimatechange.org. If you live in an area, that's not New York. Obviously, most of the country doesn't live in New York City. There might be chapters already existing that you can plug into, and there's resources on our website where you can start your own. And if you want to learn more about the convergence, you can go to convergeforclimate.org.
And that website will have things like ride shares and places where they can stay, stuff like that.
Yes, it will. And another component is this is really a moment where you have a say in what this looks like. There's a form on the website where you can propose a teach-in, and we're getting them every day, and we're gonna have to sit down and see what we can do and prioritize. But we've got a lot of great partner organizations. We got a lot of space for this, and there's lots of different ways to plug in. And look for some Occupy-style assemblies. Look for food. Look for meeting new people. Look for making new connections. And we've spoken about the convergence. We've spoken about the People's Climate March. Another component is that's not all that's going on. There's going to be actions in the week leading up to the convergence, and there's going to be actions during the UN Climate Summit. So the convergence will be a space where you can really plug in to some of the on-the-ground activism that people here in New York are already building. I've spoken to veterans of the World Trade Organization protest in Seattle in 1999, and they really feel it's time for something similar here, particularly focused on climate. So, but there's a key difference there. The difference is, in Seattle in 1999, hundreds of thousands of people streamed into the city, and they shut down those trade negotiations that were impoverishing people around the world. And they pushed for just trade negotiations, fair trade. Now, we don't want to shut world leaders down when they're talking about climate. We want them to be there discussing what they're going to do, taking major steps and making commitments for greenhouse gas reductions. So our objective is not to shut down the talks. It's to make them stay in, to lock them in until they come up with something real and substantial that's going to help people in the Philippines who were hit by Typhoon Haiyan, people here in New York City who were hit by Sandy, people in California that are struggling with drought. This is really affecting working people across the globe, everyday people across the globe. And, we don't have helicopters to escape when a storm comes. So this is really our only option as we look at the predictions coming from scientists. As we look at the predictions coming from scientists, normally a pretty reserved bunch, but the things they're saying are, if we continue down this path, our planet and its ability to sustain human life itself is actually in jeopardy.
So you mentioned world leaders. Have you guys been able to make contact with any world leaders or reach out to them, trying to see if you let them know you're here?
We're going to let them know we're here during the People's Climate March, and hopefully it'll be very hard for them to ignore hundreds of thousands of people in the street. That's the extent of the outreach we've done to world leaders. I mean, you listen to President Obama's speeches, and you hear him say, like he did in 2012, we've built enough oil and gas pipeline to encircle the earth and then some. Obama knows, and he's spoken very to the point about this in the past, that climate change is a real threat. And still he goes on television and he says things like that. It's hard to take his commitments to addressing climate change seriously when he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. I believe one Washington Post reporter called it the flying unicorn energy strategy, because he's got renewable investments over here, he's got oil and gas leases over here, 700 million acres of Bureau of Land Management land now being leased to oil and gas companies. And as I stated earlier, the amount of energy in this country drawn from renewables is still less than 1%. What is it now? 6 years since he came to office. This is not a a serious strategy for addressing climate change. And if you think about how many people are really struggling to get by, people that are unemployed or have low wage jobs, there's actually a real opportunity here to address the climate crisis and to put people to work building a green infrastructure that we desperately need. And another way to, ways to raise revenue, you tax carbon emitters at the source of extraction, right? Make it very costly for them to extract fossil fuels and then later to burn those fossil fuels as a way of phasing it out. And you put those funds in the hands, you invest those funds in public infrastructure projects, that revamp our energy grid, that set up wind farms along the East Coast. These are some of the projects we could really invest in if we actually put our money behind something like this. And we know there's money, right? We know Wall Street makes billions of dollars. Another option is a financial transaction tax. Wall Street makes transactions every day, and they're not taxed for them. But if I go down to the store and I buy a candy bar, I have to pay a sales tax. There's a massive revenue stream there that could be utilized. So there's money out there. It's just in the hands of very few people, and that's another component of system change, right? It's not just that we need to stop pollution, but there's a social drive going on here that puts money, resources, power in the hands of a very few, a few number of people, and takes it away from us. And that social system happens to have a very negative interface with nature, which sustains life on Earth. If you just look at what these factories are emitting, these nuclear plants, these coal-fired power plants, these gas plants, what they're putting in our atmosphere, you can't look at that and have much hope for a future. And people that believe that we can sustain ourselves and continue down this path are utopians. We are anti-utopians. We are realists, and we realize that we have to enact massive change very swiftly. And that's what hopefully September 21st with the People's Climate March and September 19th and 20th before that with the climate convergence, that's what we can really begin to accomplish, enacting some serious system change from the bottom up.
Have you guys planned like a session where people can come and connect with other people from different parts of the world?
Mm-hmm. There's going to be, several informal works, spaces where, there won't be anything going on. It's not going to be an academic type conference. It's really going to be about the interface between intellectuals and activists, and coming up with solutions and strategies for changing the world.
Do you want to give the information on where people can get this information, who they can get in contact with one more time?
Yep, the websites you want to know, you want to tattoo in your brain, convergeforclimate.org and peoplesclimate.org.
Anything else you want to say?
See you in September.
The fossil fuel and nuclear industries have been cultivating friends in Washington and all the state capitals so they can get laws passed that are in their favor. Their friends in Washington have gotten them billions in tax subsidies. That's your money, folks. The nuclear industry has also gotten the Price-Anderson Act to make up for the lack of private insurance. The fossil fuel industry has gotten exemptions from the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Drinking Water Protection Act. So what's an environmentalist to do? Sometimes we can win locally. In New York State, many municipalities have passed bans on fracking, which is a way of extracting methane to sell as natural gas that pollutes local air, pollutes local water, and lowers property values. The gas companies took the bans to court, of course, and they lost. On June 30th, the highest court in New York issued a precedent-setting decision to allow local control over fracking. If a town or township doesn't think even the promised money is worth losing clean water, clean air, or property values, they can do so. This is especially valuable to farming communities, which would be lost if their water got polluted. So what does that mean? Catskill Citizens for Safe Energy has an interesting analysis. The 79 towns with bans in place no longer have to worry about being sued. Town boards that once feared expensive lawsuits are now free to take action. Pro-fracking municipal officials who have used lawsuit concerns as an excuse for inactions now stand exposed. And in fact, some towns are already moving to adopt new laws. People throughout the state will be going to town meetings and demanding protective ordinances. The Court of Appeals also said that state legislature has the right to pass a law that would invalidate local bans. And that could have ramifications in many ways, but Catskill Citizens feels that this is unlikely in the current political climate. However, there's always a however, there is widespread concern that if Governor Cuomo is reelected, he will use the Court of Appeals decision to open New York to fracking while claiming he's respecting, quote, the will of the people, unquote. Because communities that want fracking can have it, and communities that don't can ban it. I wonder about when polluted water from fracking areas gets into and mixes with unpolluted water from non-fracking areas. Groundwater doesn't pay attention to legal decisions and flows where it flows. Zephyr Teachout, who is challenging Cuomo in the Democratic primary, is calling for a statewide fracking ban, as is Green Party candidate Howie Hawkins. The Republican candidate, Rob Astorino, has promised to frack New York on his first day in office.
This is Ken Gale for Environment TV Weekly News. When the air or water are clean, thank an environmentalist. If not, become one. Enough said.